What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to For the Millie. 2-game slate tonight, Monday Night Football doubleheader. I don't know. I've heard a lot of complaints, TwoGun, about these doubleheaders. I kind of think they're exciting. What about you?
I don't know what it says about me that I've been doing the best on the doubleheaders and worse on like the main slates. Okay, let's look at like my performance over the past year and a half or whatever. I won my $1 million on that conference championship, which is obviously a 2-game slate. Last week's 2-game slate, I did fine. I actually won. I've generally been losing this season in general, but I won that slate. I don't know. Maybe that's there's some maybe it's my. I mean, a lot of this is variance, especially with the main slate and blah blah. But I really think the 2-game slate's good. It's easy to focus your strategy. And it's the type of situation where if you're wrong, you're wrong. But like on the main slate, you can be right about a guy, but it just so happens some other guy did better. So it's not like you were wrong, you just got outscored by this one other player. Mm-hmm. Whereas on a 2-game slate, it's pretty easy. Like, everyone's going to have their general chalk strategy, and you can find a way to pivot, and it either works or it doesn't. You're not going to get, lose because some other random 4th game just went crazy and you didn't have those guys.
Yeah, it's we're just trying to tell a story of what's going to happen tonight. It's a lot easier to do that for 2 games than it is for the full main slate. I need to take a moment, by the way, to tilt my face off a little bit, because in the afternoon only slate, a 4-game slate, so kind of fitting this theme perfectly, I had a chance for a really, really big day yesterday. I don't know if you had any sweats yourself involving Deshaun Watson and Amari Cooper.
That holding call definitely cost me about $20,000.
Yeah,
I wasn't going to win $1 million or anything yesterday, but I bet you pick 6 would have hit. Mm-hmm. I would have placed more in my contest. So yeah, that call was not very. That was
bad call, by the way. That should not have been a holding call, and it cost me a first place finish in the afternoon slate. A bunch of tickets, probably something like $12,000, which much bigger return on my investment compared to the $30,000 for you yesterday. So very, very upset with that. And actually, I finished 8th in the main contest that I was in for the afternoon only slate, and I was in 3rd up until like the very last second. So I was, I needed basically anything. The Browns had a final drive into the red zone. Amari Cooper caught a ball down to like the 5. They weren't able to get into the end zone. If I got almost anything at all, I would have gone up to 2nd place. Got nothing. With the long touchdown that was called back, if that had stood, I would have been first place by about 8 points, so a very convincing win. And then in the final moments, I was in 3rd place, and Jordan Mason's final carry of the game goes for 25 yards, gets him to 102 with the bonus, and I get passed by a train and fall all the way to 8th. So very, very not fun last few moments of that slate, but it's nice to get a sweat, and hopefully we can repeat that tonight and have more of a sweat.
I think what people need to remember is, like, I'm sure like our subs that saw me, tout Amari Cooper for like the 4th week in a row will be like, obviously you went, one time too far, but that one play went from him being a bust to him being a great call. And that's football. That's just how football is. It's 1 or 2 plays can make or break the week. And you have to respect that. This isn't basketball where it's a lot, it's a lot of plays. It's just continuous thing. It's a few big plays generally is what causes. And some people's like, oh, it's bullshit, or that's bullshit that he got there, or it's not bullshit because that's how the game's played.
Yeah.
It's just, that's how football is. It's not a bunch of 5-yard passes and, 7-yard or 4 to 7-yard runs. That's not how it works. It's a game of big plays.
Mm-hmm. It's also a good reminder that all we can do as DFS players is try to put ourselves in that position as often as we can, because we know that once you're in that position where you might get first place, you might get 5th, you might get 10th, the swings are enormous, and you can't control whether you finish 1st or 3rd, but you can control how often you're finishing in the top 1%, how often you're giving yourself those sweats. And frankly, I can't complain too much, because basically every single time I put myself in that position in the PGA season, I got the bounces my way that I needed and got those first place finishes. So it was about time one didn't go my way to be completely honest with you guys. So it's just part of DFS, and it's part of what we do. It's honestly, I feel like it's part of the fun. Like, it was not fun watching that call get called back, but not knowing what's about to happen and just knowing your process was good, it's plenty fun to me.
Mm-hmm.
Carlito, does that mean you are the subscriber who had the takedown in the showdown yesterday? I'm not sure if that was you or not, but shout out to whoever that was. By the way, big shout out, good friend Rotomania, as many of you guys know him. He is an FTN subscriber. He hits for $30,000 yesterday in the early slate, and I was texting with him thinking that like that was his big hit for the day. And then in the evening, he sends, "Oh, by the way, this helped," and it's a $100,000 win from the main slate. So it's been a really, really good start for FTN as a whole this NFL season. Hopefully we continue this wave of success. And with that, let's talk a little bit about pick six, because TwoGun, we've talked a lot about kind of our unique process to approaching pick six and how actually straightforward it can be, where on these big slates, it's about correlation. On these small island slates like we have tonight, it's about boosting your payout. So from the Thursday night game, Giants, Cowboys, I did have a 6 for 6 that hit. And instead of the estimated 24x payout, it was a 36x payout. So I want us to talk through this one a little bit and just kind of the story we were trying to tell in this lineup from pick six. So I'll go ahead and bring it up. Let me blow this up for you guys a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. But sign up for pick six tonight. Promo code FTN gets you $5 for an extra 50 from pick six. And I believe there's also a promotion going on tonight where there's just a 30% profit boost for a lot of people. So go check that out as well. And try to tell a story like this in your lineup that you build. So the one I started with, the one we talked a ton about on the show this past Thursday, was Devin Singletary less than 60.5 rushing yards. Basically, the entire industry was just all in on this idea that Dallas can't stop the run. They're just going to get bullied every single game. And so I knew that Singletary's more than 60.5 rush yards was going to be one of the most popular picks of the night. So that was my first pick, just going less. And then every other pick involved here was helping tell the story of how Singletary would get less than that. So essentially, I was saying New York can't do what they want to do offensively. Dallas can do what they want to do offensively. So Dallas runs the ball effectively. Dowdle more than 39.5 rushing yards. Dallas is able to get the ball to their best player. CeeDee Lamb more than 80.5 receiving yards. If they're moving the ball this much, Brendan Aubrey is going to have his chances to kick more than 7.5 kicking points. I think he finished with 11, even though he missed a kick at the end. There might have just been fantasy points, which includes the bonus on DraftKings for a 40-yarder and a 50-yarder. So maybe it wasn't quite 11, but he got there pretty easily. And then if the Giants aren't able to move the ball, Neighbors isn't going to score as easily, so less than 0.5 touchdowns for Neighbors. And then finally, if Dallas is doing what they want to do offensively, if they're able to play a more conservative style with a lead, Prescott less than 0.5 interceptions. So all of this hit, and because it was based, there's not anything like super contrarian in these five. But because this first pick, this core pick, Singletary, less than 6.5 rushing yards, was not just contrarian, but leveraging one of the most popular picks, only 1.6% of total entries went 6 for 6. And so I got this really nice 36x payout. Anything stand out to you here, TwoGun?
Yeah. The one thing I'd say is instead of doing a Prescott interceptions, you could also just do Prescott under attempts. That's something I've been using a little bit more as correlating. Is if it's a dominant game by a team, you can do under attempts. And if it in the same way, you could also maybe do over attempts on the opposing team. If you think the guy's going to have to be passing it and not so much just try to guess like who's going to catch or whatever. I will point because like last night I missed out on. I got 5 out of 6 on a few because I did some Ravens beatdown type, game things, but I included a Josh Allen interception. Whoops. He didn't throw an interception. He had a fumble.
Yeah.
But that cost me I don't want to tell you how much it cost me. It cost me about $34,000. So just want to respect that interceptions, but he also did less than interceptions, which remember I did more than interception. So maybe I could have just. I don't know if I had a Lamar Jackson in those things. I think I had Lamar Jackson under passing yards because it was the idea that they were going to dominate on the ground with Derrick Henry.
Yep.
But so just something to think about.
Yeah. So I did consider it, and the reason why I didn't was because I just wasn't totally sold on the correlation with the Lamb more than 80.5 receiving yards, and I knew I wanted this one. In large part because if you remember, we were live on stream when we saw Lamb drop from 81.5 to 80.5. So I personally really liked his more than pick, even at 81.5. And so the fact that it dropped let me know that it was going to be a low owned pick. Kind of surprising, right? Like the superstar receiver, just more on his receiving yards. Wouldn't expect that to be less than 1% picked. But because we saw it live, I kind of knew that it wouldn't be super popular. So I wanted that one, and I didn't love the correlation there with Dax less on attempts, even though from a game script perspective, it absolutely would have made sense. And Lamb got the more than 80.5 receiving yards in large part because he had that one big play. So that also would have correlated really well with the less on attempts. So certainly could have done it. It worked out this way, and I think it would have hit regardless. So good thing to talk through there.
Yeah, it's one of the picks I had hit yesterday was I was building a like a Arizona beatdown. Mm-hmm. So it was James Conner over rushing yards, and Jane Daniels throwing an interception. Yeah, and I think some others like Kyler Murray under passing yards. Mm-hmm. Marvin, it ended up winning for the opposite reason. So it's funny how sometimes you think it's going to happen and then you lose because of some other side, and then this time it actually won for the exact opposite. Like James Conner just somehow had a huge game, even though they got demolished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually another reason why I built this the way that I did. So, for example, like I didn't go with a more on receptions for Wan'Dale and Malik Neighbors, because it's, to me, like there are two different types of correlation in play. There's what happens when New York has the ball, and so in that regard, the less on Singletary's rushing yards is very positively correlated with the less on Neighbors, or with the more on Neighbor and Wan'Dale Robinson receptions number, because it essentially tells the story that they're passing instead of running. That's great, but it doesn't. But the second type of correlation is just who has the ball. It's not just what happens when they have the ball, but how often do they have the ball? How many plays are they running? And in that regard, like every Wan'Dale reception for a first down, every Neighbor's reception for a first down is a new series that they can hand the ball off to Singletary instead of punting the ball back to Dallas. So lots of different ways to think through this stuff. As long as you're thinking through it and trying to correlate, you're going to build some really solid entries and give yourself good chances to win. Mm-hmm. All right. With that, let's jump into the 2-game slate. What we're going to do here, we're going to start on the 2-game slate. We'll talk a little bit of showdown kind of just organically as we talk through these 2 games. And then once we get through the 2-game slate, we'll talk our favorite pick 6 plays for the night, what our, maybe this tonight, what is tonight's version of the Singletary less on rushing yards that we can kind of build around and really leverage for this pick 6 slate. But before that, 2-game slate, traditional DraftKings, kind of our favorite. And to your point earlier, it's what you and I have been doing really well so far this season. So very excited for this 2-gamer. I think it's another solid one. And I have a very contrarian path. What are your initial thoughts on this slate? Where do you think people are going to go? And what was kind of your first instinct of how to approach this slate?
I mean, I think if you're kind of followed me, for a few years now, I think everyone probably knows how I'm thinking about this slate. What does everyone see? Everyone sees a very ugly game. Mm-hmm. I think this other like random pick website was like doing something like they're giving giveaways for every turnover. Like no one wants to watch Huntley and Levis. Let's have a turnover giveaway. And everyone's gonna like the night game, which should be it's a close spread and it's a relatively higher spread. So everyone's gonna probably want to roster Geno, maybe Jared Goff in DFS. Tyler Huntley might get a little bit of love because he can run, but people don't really want to pair him. They definitely don't want to pair him with Waddle. They might pair him. I mean, Tyreek Hill is going to have extremely low ownership considering he's Tyreek Hill and it's 2 games.
Yep.
So I think Jameson Williams is going to be incredibly popular just because he's affordable. People are going to use the running back. Like people will like use Achane. You're thinking, oh yeah, Miami will do Achane and maybe the Miami defense, and then they don't really have anything to do with Tennessee, so they might throw in Tyler Boyd just as a salary saver, even though he's like the third option at best. And then they're going to just stack the second game in a variety of ways. I don't know what they're going to do. Noah Fant's being, popular just because of his price, but it's Noah Fant. None of the tight ends are great. Laporta is obviously the clear best one, but he's expensive. And is he kind of injured still? I don't know. His pick 6 number is really low. It's like 39.5 yards. It doesn't mean I want to hit the over. It's more like, I don't know, like maybe he's just overpriced. Like there's been no good tight ends this year. They all suck. At best of all, the best thing you could have done is just shitty tight end because any tight end in the top 100 was pretty bad.
Yeah.
I think people are going to stack the second game and they're going to use a piece or two of the first game. And obviously, I'm going to do the opposite because if that's how it works, like Achane gets 80 yards and a touchdown, and everyone else sucks in the first game, and it's all about the second game and choosing the right Seattle receiver. I don't know which one will go off: Lockett, Metcalf, JSN, combo the two, and then which. I don't know. Like if then let everyone else win. Everyone else can win. But if it's the first game that scores more points, and the second game is kind of like the way the Lions played the last game, where it was a Montgomery game, and everyone on Arizona sucks, then I'm probably going to do well.
I'm 100% with you. My theme for the night is a Tennessee stack, and we're going to need a couple things to break our way in this one. So first and foremost, we know that Tennessee is not going to want to just sling the ball all around the field. In order for that to happen, we need Miami to perform pretty well offensively. Fortunately, our best projected running back on the slate by a fairly wide margin is Devon Achane. And so I'm going to kind of start with Achane with the assumption that, okay, they move the ball through him. Maybe he has a couple explosive plays, scores a touchdown or two, and forces Tennessee to pass the ball. We saw a couple times last year, Levis really showed a ceiling when being forced to throw and throw down the field. He's making a ton of mistakes. Yes, we know that. But like even last game, he ends up with 260 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. He had over 35 rushing yards in each of the first 2 weeks. So the ceiling is there. It hasn't happened yet this season, but we know what the path to that ceiling looks like, which I really like. And then the other aspect of it that I really like, we know where the production is going to come from. So this past game was the first time that DeAndre Hopkins actually looked like himself, looked really explosive, really strong hands, as we know that he always has. And so the combination of DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley, 5,300 and 5,900 respectively for these two guys, is significantly cheaper than any combination you're going to get from Seattle or Detroit. Also a lot cheaper than the duo you're going to get from Miami. But I think that they have every bit the upside that those other guys have. And so given the fact that they're also contrarian, and Levis is going to be contrarian, I just think it's a really nice start. It lets you save a bunch of money on your primary stack, which can be used on Sam Laporta, can be used on a couple high-priced either running backs or Amon-Ra St. Brown if you don't want to just completely leverage him. So it's a really nice foundational piece for a stack tonight, and certainly the way that I'm going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I right now have 2 lineups. And I think that's all I'm going to do. And one is a Levis lineup and one is a Tyler Huntley lineup.
When you go to Huntley, are you trying to get 2 of 3 of Achane, Tyreek, and Waddle? What's your stacking strategy there?
Yeah, you do Tyreek Hill, Waddle, or Jonnu Smith, or all 3. Because there's so few games. It's just Tyler Huntley isn't going to throw the ball that much. If we want to talk about a guy that's really not going to be rostered tonight, it's Jalen Waddle. That's a guy who's no one's going to. So if he breaks one, you have him, wow. Especially if it's a low scoring slate otherwise. So I feel like the whole point, we were showing him at 11%. I'd actually probably take the under of 11%, but maybe I'm
In
wrong.
single entry, I definitely would. Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think it's not this slate isn't about like the high, getting 200 points. It's just getting more points than other people because it could be a really low scoring slate.
Mm-hmm.
Detroit games can sometimes be really ugly from a fantasy scoring process. Same thing with Seattle because they can spread the ball around, and if they spread the ball around and they don't score that much, it doesn't end up being a whole lot of fantasy points.
Yep. Yeah, I very much agree with that. And then the other thing I'd say is just anytime you have a 2-game slate like this, we've talked about this before, but like every decision you make should be connected to one another. So when you are building a stack from this Tennessee-Miami game, it makes your decisions from the Seattle-Detroit game a lot easier. Number one decision is, okay, if I want the passing production from this Tennessee-Miami game to separate on this 2-game slate, I need there to not be much passing production in this Seattle-Detroit game, which probably means a lot of production has to come from the running backs. Unless you think that both of these offenses or one of these offenses can be totally shut down, there's going to be production. They're going to be touchdowns scored. The easiest way to take that away from the receivers is to have their running back. So David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kenneth Walker, I think all of these guys make a lot of sense. So how are you playing this Seattle-Detroit game knowing that you're stacking the first game instead?
Yeah, like one of them is David Montgomery, Lions defense.
Mm-hmm.
The old-fashioned, hater stack. I don't tell you, like Detroit's just gonna shut you down, and you're gonna feed David Montgomery.
Yep.
The other one doesn't have that exact thing, but it's spiritually close. Let's just leave it at that.
There's honestly not a ton to talk through in terms of just like evaluating plays. We all are familiar with all of these plays. What I will say though, the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against numbers from this game are really interesting. So I do want to run through that a little bit. Detroit is probably the most eye-opening. So they have been a fantastic matchup for opposing receivers. Wide receiver ones, plus 48% production. Wide receiver twos, plus 43%. Wide receiver threes, plus 36%. So basically every single receiver has feasted against this Detroit defense. And yet, negative 39% for tight ends, negative 59% for running back. So potentially bad spot for Kenneth Walker. The most surprising of all, though, you see all those great numbers for wide receivers, negative 1% for quarterbacks. So they've been quite neutral, which to me says they're moving the ball. They're not necessarily scoring, but Detroit is very, very clearly trying to say, we are going to stop the run. We are going to take that away. We're going to try and get teams in as many third and long situations as possible. Let Aiden Hutchinson really rush the quarterback and let him make plays that way. The tough part about this is that it means that the game script that we want, given our own preference for stacking this Miami-Tennessee game and getting some rushing production, that doesn't necessarily work for that Seattle offense very well. So to your point, like the Montgomery and the Lions pairing, the most likely outcome for an early stack to work here might be that the Seattle offense has to get shut down, because if they're not shut down, it just seems really likely that one of Lockett, JSN, or Metcalf is going to have a pretty good game.
Yeah, and I think we're set. I mean, like, that's the optimizer seems to believe that Geno is going to be the most popular quarterback by far.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also already seeing that in pick 6, where his passing yards have gone from like 247.5 to 252.5. So people are clearly clicking on the Geno over.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to say. Like, at some point, it could definitely work. I get it. They're going to keep the game close. Like, the spreads makes people think, it's going to be a close game, and they're going to throw the ball to stay in the game. Kenneth Walker might not be 100%. Zach Charbonnet kind of sucks. I get why people want to stack Geno with two of their guys, bring it back with. I get that, and my response is, if that's what's going to win, then let someone else win, because they don't need my lineup to do the same thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the point? And I almost think the same thing in pick 6. Like, I don't have a variety of picks. I'm not always going to do under Geno or under this and that. Like, I'm hoping those things, some of mine hits, and the Geno stuff that the public does just doesn't hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm in complete agreement there. Another thing I'll say, the DVOA numbers just as interesting for the Seattle defense. Negative 21% for quarterbacks, negative 28% for wide receiver 1s, negative 45% for wide receiver 2s, negative 17% for wide receiver 3s, and negative 5% for running backs. So the Seattle defense just has been good. I think that's the easiest way to characterize it, except plus 40% for opposing tight ends. So if you need a reason to believe in Sam Laporta's resurgence this week, tonight, it is the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against metric. Just saying there's one clear way for opposing offenses to attack Seattle, and that is with the tight end position. So this might be a big Laporta night. Although, watching the last game, even before Laporta was hurt, there was a frustrating amount of Brock Wright receptions. So, I don't know if it's a play calling thing where they know that Laporta is getting a ton of attention, and so maybe they're leaving Laporta in protection and sending Brock Wright out for a route, knowing Brock Wright is going to be single covered, whereas if it was Laporta going out, he'd be doubled. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but it was certainly frustrating to see, again, even before Laporta's injury. But I think I have faith, and we talk about it a lot, and I'm going to continue to talk about it. The tight end position is the one where you can get the most separation. If Laporta has one of those, 8 receptions, 100 yards, and 1 touchdown games, the advantage you're getting over all other tight ends is so much higher than any advantage you're going to get from a receiver having a similar type of game.
Yeah. I just haven't gone there myself, to be honest, in my lineups. I thought I was going to have Sam Laporta in a lineup. Right now, I don't think I'm going to. It's just the price thing. If I make a third lineup, it's like I'm definitely going to use him, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that third lineup or not.
Are you going to one of the Tennessee cheap tight ends then in a lot of your lineups?
I'm generally just I'm doing Shig with Will Levis, or I'm using Jonnu Smith with Tyrell Huntley.
Okay.
But again, I don't love it. It's just kind of like, well, shit, I guess I have to use a tight end.
I think this Josh Weil guy very much in play as well. 4 receptions on 5 targets for 43 yards last game. His snap share has increased every single game. I think he was around 25% in week 1, 40% week 2, up to 47% last game when the targets finally came. They've been efficient when targeting him. He's caught 6 of 7 passes. So if he's more involved tonight, I certainly wouldn't be surprised. Only $2,500, and his ownership by no means is going to get out of control just because people don't really want to use Levis. And so, a lot of the tight end ownership on a slate like this is just going to be who are people stacking, and they're just going to throw in whatever tight end there because they know that the tight end position has been so bad.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's just like almost like a pure punt there, which makes sense. If you just need the extra salary for whatever, you know what I'm saying?
In terms of running backs from this late game, how are you comparing Montgomery, Gibbs, and Kenneth Walker, including, we have this question here, thoughts on Gibbs and Montgomery in the same lineup, which I certainly think we've seen it work a lot in the past on a slate of this size.
Yeah, I think it does work. And let's face it worked last night. If I put Justice Hill instead of Mark Andrews in my Ravens lineup, I would be about $150,000 richer right now.
Me too. Not 150,000, but 15,000, something like that. It would have been there.
So sometimes you just need to think about that. Like, we're noticing double running back isn't something you're going to use on a main slate, but on a showdown, and this is a glorified showdown, it definitely could work.
Yep. So
yeah, if you're doing Lions defense and Montgomery, and you have a spot for Gibbs, like I would go Gibbs over Metcalf. About the same price.
Yeah.
And your instinct is to be going Metcalf.
Mm-hmm. I love this call here from Brian saying someone from FTN is getting a takedown tonight. If you made this take on pretty much every slate so far this year, you'd be successful quite a bit. We've had showdown success, we've had small slate success, main slate success. It's been a great start, as I said earlier. So if you're not already an FTN subscriber, check that out, ftnfantasy.com/pricing. Figure out what package is best for you. Since you're watching this show, it's probably the DFS subscription that you're going to be looking for. With that, I think one potential path to takedown, and this is certainly the lower probability play, but man, the payoff if it hits is going to be huge, would be pairing Kenneth Walker with the Seahawks defense. I mentioned the DVOA numbers earlier. The Seahawks defense has been far more effective than people thought they'd be coming into the season. Already have 11 sacks in 3 games. Now they faced Denver, New England, Miami. So definitely a grain of salt there. The opponent adjustments are already in effect on the fantasy points against numbers, but it's hard to do complete opponent adjustments this early in the season. So they might be being overrated a little bit. That said, Jared Goff hasn't exactly looked great. So, if you think about his game against Tampa Bay, I think the Tampa Bay defense was quite effective that game. Goff threw the ball 55 times, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Maybe we see something like that, particularly if Seattle jumps out to an early lead and can make Detroit a little bit more one-dimensional, where they can't just run the ball over and over and over again. So there's a path there. And if the combination of Walker and Seattle defense hits, it's also taking out the Montgomery lineups, the Gibbs lineups, the St. Brown lineups, certainly the Jameson Williams lineups as well. So lots of potential leverage with it. It's a lower probability play, but if you have it and it hits, it's going to be super, super powerful in your lineups.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if I'm probably going to do a third lineup, and I'm talking myself into doing a Kenneth Walker Seattle with Laporta, which doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense, but they're probably going to be throwing the ball.
Yeah.
Is the way I look at it. Detroit. You do not use, you definitely don't use Montgomery. I wouldn't use Gibbs either. I think it's still okay to use Detroit pass catchers though.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be trying to throw the ball. What you don't use is Seattle pass catchers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I would also say, I don't think you want Jameson Williams. I think it would be either Laporta or St. Brown and just kind of feast on the PPR aspect of it, where Jameson's a little bit more likely to get there on the big play. His role's different enough this season, right? He had 9 targets in week 1, 11 in week 2. So it's not impossible that he has that 7 reception, 90-yard game and is optimal in that way. But it's just far more likely that you get that type of game from St. Brown or Laporta when the Seattle defense comes through.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see. Here's an interesting question. Miami defense captain a good spot. Will Levis has been obviously very bad and super turnover prone. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I just think it's going to be overused a little bit because everyone is in on this narrative that Will Levis is just going to make comical mistakes every single week.
Oh yeah,
I don't see that.
I really hate taking the Miami defense. That's the play I hate the most. I remember how much I hated the Bengals defense last.
Mm-hmm.
It ended up being the Bills defense was the nuts, which was still like a 31% defense, but the Bengals was a 50% defense. Mm-hmm. And I think tonight the Dolphins are, because they're all about the same. I think the Dolphins could easily be a 60% defense. And then Tennessee could be like a 20%, something like that. Because everyone's like, Brissett, Tyler Huntley sucks too.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I think Miami will be way, way, way up there. And then I do think Detroit will be second. Tennessee third, and then a very distant fourth, Seahawks. Like the Seahawks might be under 5% in single entries tonight, which just makes it so intriguing. And how popular do you think Kenneth Walker is going to get? Because he's one of those guys where like the role is good enough that you know that he's going to project fairly well on every site. You know the expected ownership is going to be there. But man, talk about a guy who could slip through the cracks and just end up 15% when everyone thinks he's going to be 40 and no one's playing him because they expect him to be 40.
I would set it over. I mean, you guys have it at 35, 36. I'm thinking more like 20, 25.
Yeah.
Gibbs will probably be like 75 to 80.
Mm-hmm.
H-Chan will probably be up there too. The only thing is then you have salary issues. And that's why everyone no one's gonna have Tyreek Hill. You're gonna have a lot of Jackson Smith and Jigba, lots of Jameson Williams, lots of Tyler Boyd. That's who everyone's gonna be using. And then a cheap tight end. That's what I think people are gonna be forced to feel like they're forced to pay up at running back. And I mean, Kenneth Walker doesn't save them that much compared to Gibbs or Montgomery.
Yeah. How about this, Brian, like giving us a full ad read here in the YouTube chat saying, why not just go $5 extra a month, get the full package instead of just the DFS package, paid off his entire subscription just on prop bets alone. Lots of success as well coming from the DFS street. So appreciate you, Brian. Appreciate you as well here. Carlito, FTN is the only family he has. It's been a pretty good family so far this season. So appreciate you guys. Yeah. Question, hates defense today. Single entry for over 15,000 people. I mean, we kind of just talked through this, but like, I think the number one thing that you should be thinking about when you're picking your defense for this slate is not what defense do I think is going to do well. It's what defense makes sense within the story that I'm telling throughout the rest of the lineup. So just answer that question and go with it. And I think you'll be pretty good. The only, and actually my strongest take, I think you'd agree with this too, TwoGun, is not play this defense. It's don't play the Miami defense.
Right. Like Miami defense will be at least 50 to 60% used, and that's just lame. It's just lame. I'm sorry. Like what? Don't play a 2-game slate because you're afraid to lose.
Mm-hmm.
That's just sad.
Yeah.
That's like striking out. That's like striking out looking. Like if I lose, like I am striking out swinging.
Right. The only thing that I think could keep the Miami defense from becoming 70-80% single entries is that Tony Pollard is going to get enough love that people won't want to have a defense against a running back that they feel great about. And so I think we'll see Pollard held in check because people want to use the Miami defense. We'll see the Miami defense held in check because people want to see Pollard, want to use Pollard, I should say. But we're also going to see, I think, a fair amount of Miami defense with TJ Spears as a running back going up against that, saying, oh, if they're way behind and Spears is going to catch 6 passes out of the backfield and be good that way. But that just means Will Levis is dropping back more, and that's sacks and interceptions and fumbles. So something to keep in mind there. And maybe that means that you can deviate a little bit there. So like when you have when you're not using the Miami defense, maybe that's when you flip from Pollard to Spears and you just hope that he's part of a successful offense tonight or something like that. But again, just when you're making these defensive decisions, it's less about the defense itself and more about what is the story that you're telling throughout the lineup. And if you answer that question, you'll be solid.
Yeah, I just, at the end of the day, I feel like if you're, I don't know, you have to pick your spots. Mm-hmm. And I just, from the get-go, I've been picking the spot of I'm fading the chalk. There's a mega chalk lineup right now. There's a mega chalk. And the mega chalk lineup is Dolphins defense, Geno Smith quarterback, mixing in the second game, H-Chan. Yeah. Maybe people will put in Tony Pollard against the Miami Dolphin defense. They still will. I don't know how popular Pollard will be. It's just that he's a salary relief. So plus Pollard had a shitty game last week. So I don't know if it's gonna be that popular. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, it's true, but I think that people are gonna see Huntley not expect a whole lot of points from Miami, and they're gonna realize Pollard failed last week because the game script was awful from the get-go. And as long as they are still in the game, he's going to get the touches. They lost 24-17,
like 70 to 75%.
Yeah. I mean, they lost 24-17 in each of the first 2 weeks, and Pollard had 16 and 17 carries. And then week 3, he only had 6. He also had 10 targets in the first 2 weeks combined, only 4 last week. So, Spears certainly had something to do with that, but mostly that was just the game script was terrible for him last week, and I think people will give him a full pass on that. Expect more from him this week, and they'll still use him. So I'm only expecting like 40-45% on Pollard, but that 40-45% is enough to keep the Miami defense, like I said, from getting to 70-75% in single entries.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's see. Detective Gillis TwoGun wants you to elaborate on the lane methodology within the context of using game theory to take down the Millie.
Using lane methodology?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's just people, when they play DFS, they want to have this attitude of like, they're not going to lose. Like, remember the chalk idea is if I don't play this, I'm going to lose because you have to, right? Like if you don't play this guy, because they're going to go for a lot of points, or this so-and-so is safe. They use these words safe, have to. You don't have to do anything. Nothing shit. Nothing's safe. It's all just it's football. One play can change the entire slate. So if you're going with this methodology of choosing stuff that's safe or things that you have to do, then that's just lame. You're not going to win. Sometimes like some players do smash and it happens. I get it. But there's no reason to think it always is going to smash.
I think part of the reason why people make that mistake isn't even that they're afraid of losing. It's that they want to be able to sit on their couch and enjoy the game. And if they make a risky fade, and on the very first series of the game, that player has 3 receptions for 40 yards and a touchdown, they feel like, well, my night's over, my slate's over, my lineup is sunk, I can't enjoy the rest of the game. And you just have to be okay with that. If you're making the right decisions, if you're making the decisions that put yourself in the best position for takedowns, you can't be worrying about like how much fun you're having in the second quarter. It's what is the decision that makes it most likely that I end up with a sweat in the fourth quarter. And whether that sweat ends in the third quarter, the second quarter, the first, or it ends because the final drive doesn't go your way like it did for me with that Amari Cooper and Deshaun Watson stack, it doesn't make any difference. It's the same thing at the end of the day. It's just about what's going to give you the best chance for the sweat throughout that fourth.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to say is like people play things for the wrong reasons. If you just think a guy is so good, and even if it's popular, you're still going to use him, that's fine. That's not lame. That's just he's good play. It's a good play. Whatever. I'm not going to mess up my lineup just because other people like. That's the reason you play chalk. Is you just think it's a good play, and whatever other people like it too. So be it.
And you think that you have other players in your lineup that are going to help you win the slate. You're not counting on that chalky play to help you do that.
Yeah. Whereas there's certain plays that are like, I feel like I have to do this because it's the only thing that makes sense. It's safe. It's blah, blah, blah. And a defense is a defense. Like pick six can change everything. And it's totally random.
Yep.
It's
all
not
right.
Like
before we get into
running back that is now getting 25 touches. Situation.
Yep. Before we get into the pick six for tonight's games, let's talk real quick. Let's do slate breakers, and then let's talk about our favorite captains for each showdown. I'll kick us off, and I'll say favorite captains for each showdown. In game one, it's very clearly either Ridley or Hopkins. I don't care which one you go with. I would choose one of them, and I think you could still use the other and use Levis, but if you want to just use one of them with Levis, that's totally fine as well. But I think both of those guys are going to be pretty severely under-owned at the captain spot, and our sim data was showing the same thing, basically saying they are about half what they should be in captain ownership. So I love both of those guys. And then in the Seattle-Detroit game, this one's a little bit tougher. I honestly don't have a super convicted take on anyone from this game. I think I would go to Kenneth Walker, though, and just say everyone expects Detroit to be able to run the ball. No one expects Seattle to be able to run the ball. The entire focus for Seattle is on the passing game. And it's not like Walker has to have this great game on the ground. Maybe he just has 2 touchdowns because they pass their way down there and he becomes optimal that way. And so in that regard, if you are going with the Walker stack, I think you want to make it, if you are going with Kenneth Walker captain, I think you want to make it into a Seattle stack, either 4-2 or even 5-1 Seattle over Detroit there. So those are my showdown thoughts. How about yours, TwoGun?
I don't have a whole lot of showdown thoughts. I think I have one lineup and I constructed like super quick, and really only the Seattle Detroit game is featured. But yeah, I would generally go with a beatdown stat. Like putting all the salary towards one team. You go with the Kenneth Walker. If you want to go Seattle, Kenneth Walker captain, and then maybe use like kickers to kind of like water down the other players. Or you could go like the other way with David Montgomery and as captain, and the Lions defense, and then you probably like maybe one Seahawks pass catcher and their kicker, something like that. It's kind of like where I lean, like a 4-2 or a 5, like a 4-2, but more of the salaries on one team than the other, even more so.
Yep. All right, slate breaker for the 2-gamer.
I'm going to go with Tyreek Hill. How do you not go with a sub 10% Tyreek Hill on a 2-game slate?
Yeah.
This is like the definition of a slate breaker. Like, I'm not going to just guess if Metcalf's going off or Amon-Ra or Laporta or whatever is in the second game. To me, it's very clear. Everyone wants to believe that Miami can only run the ball through HN. Like, Tyreek just needs 1 or 2 plays where he breaks it. And boom, slate broken. It did not happen last week. And he was less than 1% used on the main slate. I do not regret using him at all week 3, even though he was a bust. But at less than 1%, oh my God, I'm always going to use Tyreek Hill because he can break any slate. That's just the way he is. He's Tyreek Hill.
I think by the way, from a football perspective, the chances that he breaks this slate are so much higher because I very much expect I expect McDaniel to really use Huntley's rushing upside as part of the game plan, which makes it so much more likely that Tennessee has to commit safeties down to help with the run fits, help with those, quick screens to the outside, which means that there aren't safeties over the top. And if Huntley can do one thing in the passing game, I think it's throw the deep ball. So good chance that Tyreek, it might be like 3 catches, but 3 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he breaks the slate that way. And that would be plenty good. So I like that call. I'm going to go with Sam Laporta, and pretty predictable. It's very similar to the Travis Kelce argument that we made yesterday, which turned out to be pretty helpful. He was excellent at the tight end position, and he was really close to breaking the slate.
Yeah, he's like another catch, 30 points.
Yeah, a touchdown, he does it. And if he gets another 21 yards, so like maybe one more reception, he gets the bonus and is separating by about 10 points that way. So he was really, really close to breaking that slate. And I think Laporta can do the exact same thing tonight. One final thought on this slate. There is a 45-minute gap between the start of the second game and the start of the first game. So there is a brief window of opportunity for some late swap ideas. So like, let's say you have a Tennessee stack early on, and on the first possession, Levis goes 8 of 9 for 80 yards and a touchdown, and it's like all Ridley and Hopkins, and you feel like, okay, you're in a pretty good spot. Now maybe you say, all right, I want Montgomery and Detroit late. Like that's a pretty simple decision there. On the flip side, if the very first play from scrimmage or the very first drive, Pollard has 45 rushing yards and a touchdown, and you don't have Pollard, you have the passing stack instead. All right, now maybe you want to say, all right, I might need to be more contrarian, and I'm going to go to the Kenneth Walker and Seattle pairing. So it's a brief window, but it's enough of a window that you should be considering late swap to some degree, and you should have an idea of the kind of pivots that you can make in your lineup beforehand.
I think it's really easy to overthink that. The one thing I would say is if Will Levis throws a pick 6 and the 60% Miami Dolphins defense is now the nuts, that's when you get a little bit more contrarian in your second set of games. That's about it.
Yeah. I mean, I do agree. Like you certainly don't want to overreact to something. It's really like the outlier.
It's like a quarter. It's not even like a half. You're talking a quarter.
Yeah. But so, for example, like in the Baltimore game last night,
Yeah,
you
last
would have
night.
known by then that if you didn't have Derrick Henry, you were in trouble, right?
Yeah.
So it's an extreme example that you'd be reacting to. It's by no means guaranteed to happen, and you shouldn't be changing your lineup based on, oh, this guy has 7 fantasy points right now and my guy only has 3. But if one guy already has 24 and you don't have him and he's 60% owned, now you know, all right, I should probably change some stuff around here. So
yeah,
just
like the only player that's really going to be that high owned and could do that, maybe Tony Pollard and likely the Dolphins defense.
I think Achane as well. If you didn't have Achane,
oh yeah, you're right, Achane. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Even still, like he's so expensive, so it's like he'd have to get like he'd have to do Derrick Henry type shit.
Yeah,
you're not even like 15 to 20 points. Like he'd have to have like the bonus and a touchdown or 2 already.
Yeah. It looks like we have a couple questions on bringbacks. My favorite Levis bringback is Achane because I want that game script. So just answering that question real quick. Now let's get into some pick 6 stuff. Do you have a thought on what the most popular pick is going to be?
I'm starting to think it's Geno Smith over passing yards, but well, it went back down to 251.5. You got to remember, I think DraftKings is feeding this through their sports book. So it's often reacting to not so much pick 6 choices, but sports bets.
Yeah.
And it's like, and the same game parlays that people are placing. I'm also seeing Tyler Huntley get bid up a little bit, believe it or not. He's at 169. I'm trying to see like when I first did him, how low it was at. It may not have moved that much. Yeah, it was all the way down to 165.5.
Yeah, I'm torn on pick 6 because I do think one of the best stacks, at least tonight, is Geno, Metcalf, and Smith and Jigba. Maybe you go to Lockett instead of one of those 2 guys. But like I said, from a matchup perspective, like through and through, this should be a Geno game, and it should be a game where they have trouble running the ball. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it brings me to another important question. On this 2-game slate instead of a 1-game island game slate, how much are you still trying to stack versus just try and identify like the most popular play, like the Singletary play of this slate?
I don't know if there is a Singletary play of this slate. Do you think there is one? I don't know.
I kind of don't.
Yeah, I think people are clearly clicking over. I'd have to wait to see and download, what let's see if I didn't do it yet. I could try to download like last night's.
You know what it could be, TwoGun?
Yeah.
It could be more on David Montgomery's touchdowns. How many straight games has he scored? I mean, he's scoring in a high percentage of games. So that could be the favorite for people, in which case you go less than there. And I think that rather than like pivoting from Montgomery to Gibbs or Montgomery to some pass catchers like St. Brown, I think it would just be you're pivoting to Detroit doesn't have a very good game offensively, and maybe Seattle controls the ball, and so you go to some Kenneth Walker stuff. But what do you think of that?
You could do Kenneth Walker over rushing yards, and you can maybe do Goff over attempts if you want.
Yes, I like that. I love that actually.
Here, let me go last night because I think everyone generally liked overs last night. Let's see if I can find all. People clicked over my thing, 1,019 and under. Let's see. I don't think it was that much different. Well, 492. So yeah. Often with these payouts, people like talk about the payouts, and it's like if everything over hits, the payouts are gonna be shit.
Yeah.
That's the truth. So you definitely want them to go under. And it's not so much. I just think it's going to be kind of like last night, where it's not so much an individual going over. There's one thing going over to mess everything up. I think people click. I don't think people are clicking Tennessee, Miami unders because they're just so small. So
I also don't think people are taking that many overs from the Tennessee passing game. So my favorite stack, shocking, I know, is passing yard more for Levis, and then receiving yards more on both Ridley and Hopkins. I mean, look at these 40.5 for Ridley, 36.5 for Hopkins. Like those two guys could almost get there in their sleep. There's even plenty of room for both of those guys to hit with the more than side, and Levis is less than on his passing yards. So like the correlation, if Levis is more than 194.5, I'm so confident that both Hopkins and Ridley are getting there is essentially what I'm trying to say
here. There's certain quarterbacks that are just more correlated to their main wide receivers than others. Yeah. And Levis seems like it's that. I thought, hey, yesterday I took the over on Trevor Lawrence with Brian Thomas Jr. and Christian Kirk, and I lost on Lawrence by like 6 yards.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you can still lose, and it's bullshit, to use the term that most people like to talk about when they lose. But that's just the way it works, and that goes to show you how much a few yards can matter. But you just got to shrug it off when that happens. Like, the idea was right, like literally just a few yards, and he gets there. Whereas I feel like Jared Goff, he is way all over the place. Like, he's really spreads the ball. I think Tyler Huntley and Tyreek Hill is probably pretty safe too. If he's getting there, it's probably Tyreek Hill gets over.
Mm-hmm.
I can also see Tyreek Hill getting over and Tyler Huntley not. So you never know.
Yeah, it's a little bit tougher on the Miami side for me because I just think there's going to be so little pass volume in general, where I feel like even if you started with a more on Huntley, I would think the way that he gets there isn't that he throws the ball really well all night and spreads it out. It's that he has one 70-yard passing yard touchdown. And if that's to Tyreek Hill, it means Waddle's probably not getting there. If it's to Waddle, it means Tyreek Hill is probably not getting there. So I think the correlation is a little bit worse on the Miami side, but still very much in play. And maybe you just do a pairing with one of those guys. Maybe it's just Huntley and Tyreek that you use or something like that. But anything else that you think correlates really well with this Montgomery and Goff start? So again, it would be Montgomery, no touchdown, with Jared Goff more than 33.5 passing.
I think Geno Smith less if you're going the Kenneth Walker route.
Yeah.
Kenneth Walker rushing yards.
Yeah.
Geno Smith less attempts. And
Walker is only at 48.5 because of how good this Detroit defense is. So look, if DeAndre Swift can get to 48.5 rushing yards, then certainly Kenneth Walker can as well. So I like that.
And then it's kind of tough because after that, like, yeah, you can take an under on a receiver for the Seahawks, or you could take an over for a pass catcher. Maybe you could do Gibbs receiving yards over.
Yep.
But you start to.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's a really good one. I think the other thing you could say is
truly correlated.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is it doesn't have to just be everything from that game, right? Like you could go with this 3, and you could then go with a Huntley and Tyreek Hill stack, or with a Levis stack, something like that. You can still correlate well even outside of the game. So it doesn't have to be all 6 are from this game or all 8 are from this game. You can mix and match. Just make sure that the different pieces within that overall lineup are all correlated well.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else from Pick 6 tonight?
No.
I will leave with this. I think if you're just looking for like a one-off play that you think is that you're just trying to tie up something, maybe you want to turn a 5 pick into a 6 pick or a 7 pick into an 8 pick, something like that. I think Jason Myers more than 6.5 kicking points makes a lot of sense. This Detroit defense has just been kind of the definition of bend but don't break, and that means field goals. So I like Jason Myers more than 6.5 kicking points quite a bit as well. But that's pretty much it for me. So
I feel like generally people overuse the kicker. I'm just going to leave it at that. So if you're doing that bend, don't break thing, like pair it with like some overs.
Yes.
On yardage with Seattle at least.
Yep, I agree. And I would say pair it especially with receiving overs, because when teams can run the ball effectively, they're more likely to actually score when they get into the red zone. It's when they can only move the ball by throwing that they tend to have more trouble getting those successful drives into touchdowns instead of field goals.
Yeah, and you can maybe even pair it with the Kenneth Walker no rushing touchdown. The idea that they just didn't get in the end zone.
Yeah, Brian, I don't know if you did this, but we actually had a couple subscribers in the chat yesterday who had otherwise very successful pick six lineups fail because of certain Steelers. So that was kind of unfortunate to see. That's what you get for backing the Steelers there. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We will be back Thursday, same time, 5:30 Eastern, with another free stream. So we will see you then.